When it comes to foraging, there are a lot of myths surrounding the subject. Now, some of these myths come from people with good intentions, and others are ones that have pervaded due to a stigma surrounding the subject because foraging knowledge seems almost esoteric to some people. So, in this video, we're going to go over 4 myths of foraging, and I'm going to debunk each one. So, let's jump right into it. Myth number 4 is that foraging is destructive to the environment. Now, this is one that I see a lot, and it generally comes from a place of good intention, but it is misinformed. Now, while it's true that foraging can be destructive to the environment if you're harvesting species that are rare, threatened, or slow growing, or in other cases, harvesting an entire area's population of any given plant, it's worth noting that most foragers are not doing this and are just gathering what they need for themselves. In reality, most things that people are foraging, at least in the United States, are generally going to be non native or invasive plants. The ones that most people call weeds. Other times, they're just picking things like berries and mushrooms, which doesn't hurt the plant or the organism in the case of the mushrooms. In fact, there are some plants that actually benefit from foraging because it prevents some plants from growing too closely and thereby choking them all out, kind of like why you would thin vegetables in a garden. Also, the removal of invasive plants like garlic, mustard, and honeysuckle, for example, can allow native plant ecosystems to thrive again because they won't get shaded out in the case of honeysuckle or choked out in the case of garlic mustard. Also, some people worry about foragers tromping off trail and stepping on native plants and thereby killing them. However, these people conveniently ignore all of the other off-trail activities that humans engage in and seem to focus on just foraging as being destructive. Now, whether that comes from misguided priorities or from another place entirely, I'm not sure, but I can say that generally speaking, if you are foraging responsibly, you're most likely helping to increase native plant biodiversity, thereby providing more food to our native pollinators who have been losing food and habitat because of other human activities like excessive logging, construction projects, or even invasive insects and bacteria. Myth number 3 is that foraging is dangerous. Now, this is a really common myth that I totally understand why a person unfamiliar with the subject and the basic rules of foraging would say this. However, it's worth noting that foraging deaths are very minimal, as in like nearly non-existent. After hours and hours of research, I've struggled to come up to a conclusive number higher than 50 deaths in over 100 years. You do stand a better chance of death or injury during the hiking in or even driving into your foraging spot than you do from the actual foraging itself. Now, sure, there are environmental dangers like snakes or bears or other predators depending on where you live, but even then, deadly encounters between humans and those creatures is also very minimal, and it still doesn't prevent millions of people from visiting the great outdoors. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some risks involved with foraging, however, because there certainly are. There can be things like misidentification or an unknown allergy are among the most likely, but are generally just going to leave you with something that tastes terrible or a bad case of diarrhea or vomiting. Another reason I believe this myth is prevalent is because growing up, so many children are told by their parents that this plant or that plant is poisonous. Now, this is done by well-intentioned adults trying to keep their kids from putting unknown things into their mouths, and that is a good thing. However, as people grow up and they still remember this, they think that plants like chickweed or wood sorrel are poisonous when they are in fact not poisonous. One time I remember being at a local park harvesting some raspberries from a bush, and there were some people walking by telling me that they were poisonous. I had told them that they were raspberries and asked if they wanted me to show them how that I know that. They politely declined and then kept walking. A little while later, I saw them sitting down having a little picnic and noticed they had a container of berries from the grocery store. I had approached and asked if they were enjoying their day, and they had said yes. I then asked what they were eating, and they had said raspberries. So they were eating the exact same thing I was, but were so uninformed, yet well-intentioned, that they were telling me what I was eating was poisonous when we were in fact eating the exact same thing. Myth number 2 is that if animals eat it, so can you. Now, this is another myth I've heard a lot over the years, and it has a bit of truth to it, but only by coincidence, and it is not a set rule. Most animals are able to process things completely differently than us, and many animals will eat things that are not safe for humans to consume. For example, birds will eat the berries of poison ivy, but we cannot without some severe issues. Squirrels and deer will eat acorns without leaching them of tannins, but doing so would wreak havoc on the human kidneys. Now, this myth, I believe, comes from the prevalent idea that native people the world over learned what to eat by watching the animals. Now, while that does have some truth to it, the reality is far more complex. It wasn't only watching the animals, there was a lot of trial and error over a long period of time as well that led to native people's incredible knowledge about the natural world. So I believe this myth comes from basically just simplifying that down to just eat what the animals eat, because it removes the nuance that came with native people's long history of living with the natural world. Myth number one is that learning the subject is difficult. I get this a lot on this channel and sometimes in classes as well. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy, but it's certainly not difficult to learn how to forage. The difficulty is pretty much removed by taking your time and not trying to rush the learning process. Everybody learns at different paces, and it may take you more or less time to learn things than it will others. Some people make foraging more difficult than it is by trying to learn too many plants at once, or by looking for one specific plant only and completely disregarding the fact that foraging is a skill that has to be honed and developed over many years. On that note, some people will hear the word years and then begin to feel overwhelmed, thereby leading to fear of trying new things. In reality, there are many plants you see every day that are incredibly easy to learn their identification features and uses and not feel overwhelmed. Another way to look at this is like any other skill, like, say, video games or woodworking. The people who are good at these things have been doing them for many years, and it did take them a while to learn, and at once they were too beginners. So foraging is no different than any of those. It's something that you have to put some effort into, but is by no means difficult to learn. So another way to look at that is that with all the resources available these days, like YouTube channels like this one, plant identification apps, which those are not always accurate, but that's another story for another day, and the internet providing many great websites and the ability to find foraging books or classes in your area, right now is probably the easiest time in all of history to learn so much about foraging, when a long time ago that information would have been kept to very small groups of people. So there are 4 myths that are very common about foraging that you may have heard, and I hope this has helped kind of debunk those myths and helped kind of ease your guys' mind. I thank all of you guys for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.